scientists agreed that this was a workable number. This was something that we could take and we could, slowly work on and bring that down. The worst case scenario was getting above 2.0 degrees Celsius, because then you start dealing with a lot of melting permafrost that's releasing methane into the atmosphere. The oceans hold vast quantities of methane and what they call methane clathrates, and that starts releasing from oceans and things like that. So it starts to become a runaway train when we get there. And based on sort of business as usual right now, there's not really much of a chance for us not to hit that number. So it's concerning because humans tend to live in the here and now, but these are problems that are 30, 40, 100 years into the future. When you get to 4.0 degrees Celsius from that runaway train, it's a vastly different climate, a vastly different planet that we live on. Could humans survive? Maybe. We're very adaptable. Not many other species would make it through that, though. It would be a gigantic extinction event. The last time we were there, Greenland had the climate of South Carolina, and no mammals were able to live in the equatorial zones from Tropic of Cancer to Tropic of Capricorn. So, that's a different world that we can't understand. We as humans can't understand what it would be like to live in a vastly different climate than what we have now. I did want to talk a little bit about carbon dioxide too. It's kind of a funny, not funny, but kind of an interesting gas. It's nonpolar, so even though it's a heavy gas, 2 molecules of oxygen, 1 molecule of carbon, it still is a gas. And so if you've ever had it's a 32-foot sphere of carbon dioxide is equal to 1 ton. So if you had basically, a volume of about half of this room would be 2,000 pounds of carbon dioxide if it was full. And, if you've ever had the experience of, I like carbonated water, so, if you've ever had the experience of having an empty canister versus a full canister, you can feel the difference. I mean, even in a small canister of gas, it's quite weighty. And with carbon dioxide, just as you're making, carbonated water, that's what happens with seawater. And it forms carbonic acid. That's the reaction. Carbonic acid is, there's been people who have suggested, well, we could put a giant sail in front of the sun and cool the planet that way and get our global warming down and kind of these kinds of solutions. But you can't get rid of the fact that carbonic acid ends up in seawater. And that's what bleaches corals and really starts to damage the basis of the food chain for us, which we all depend on. So, the acidic water is something that that would be, the loss of that basis for us. And just to give you an idea of what we are doing right now, so in New York City, the buildings are responsible for about 75% of emissions, carbon emissions from that city. This is what it looks like next to the Empire, those 32-foot spheres next to the Empire State Building in 1 hour. If you look at 1 day's worth, it covers the entire Empire State Building. And buildings, again, worldwide create about 40% of the world's carbon dioxide. So this is New York City in 1 year. It's 3,000 feet high. It's a literal mountain of carbon dioxide that we create. And that's one populous city of many, many, many on the planet. So, the last time carbon was rising on this trajectory, we were in a mass extinction event. And I think we just have to be aware of that because, it is something that none of us can control in our daily lives other than how we affect our own behaviors. And so that was really kind of the genesis for me deciding to start Volta Homes, and Volta being, Alessandro Volta was the inventor of the battery. And kind of the start of electricity and things like that. And really all electric homes can be carbon neutral. And in fact, I have built one other rental as a carbon neutral building. Actually, it's not quite carbon neutral, but it's pretty darn close. And so what my goal was to build a carbon neutral student housing. Not just student housing, but in Carytown there's a mixture of young professionals and students and others. But I wanted to build a building that would be a carbon neutral place for people to live so that they could go out and change the world in whatever sphere they are in, but we had them covered on the home front because really our home life is where the vast majority of people make their carbon in the first place, living in their homes, and to some extent commuting, if you drive a lot. The original structure my wife and I owned for 25 years is on North Division Street. It was actually two homes that were kind of smashed together in 1929, and kind of a failing structure. They're really poorly kind of put together, giant sags in the floor. We did the best we could when we owned it. It was pretty okay cosmetically, but there were some serious structural difficulties, so I had to make the decision of, was I going to just address those as a Band-Aid and keep renting it, or was I going to do something better? And if I was going to do something new, what would it be? And so we decided on building the bridge, and that's what it is now. So, I did want to talk about the process of getting to a zero-energy home, and so this kind of inverted triangle is a really good model for it, because the first and most important thing, the basis of it, is efficient structures. How do you make a structure that loses less energy? Everything that comes out of your house is energy that's wasted. It goes nowhere. It does nothing for anyone. So how do we lose less energy? And that's there's some methods for doing that are very, very effective. And the next thing is, what do you have in the house that's powering the house, that's heating and cooling, that's providing the things that we use every day? How can we use less? How can we have more efficiency in that regard? And then only once you've completed that do you want to say, then let's produce, then let's get some solar panels on there, and then we can get to a net zero home. So starting out with the lose less, though, when you take an average home, about 25% of that structure is pieces of wood that are touching the inside and the outside, and wood is not a good insulator. So what do? We stuff some fluffy insulation that's very leaky. If you take fiberglass and put it in your furnace filter, you're calling it a filter, right? So it's not very good at stopping airflow. And although it does have some R value, when you're just stuffing it in between, and usually not very artfully done either, when you're just stuffing it in between studs and things like that, there's an awful lot of what I would call just kind of like radiator fins that go right into outside. So we can do things like space out our studs and try and get more insulation in those walls in different ways. But really the best way to do it is to introduce a thermal break. And a thermal break can be a lot of different ways. It can be, I tend to use polyisocyanurate foam because it's relatively flame resistant, got a very high R value. It's easy to work with, doesn't like to get wet, so you can't put it below grade. But there's also products that are made. The green product on the bottom there is zip system panels. Those have it pre-made into there with the sheathing already there. So it kind of helps builders build like a normal house. You just have to use longer nails, that's all. So it defeats the radiator fin heat flow. It keeps moisture from condensing in the wall if designed and built correctly. And the formula that you see here is that thermal break has to be at least 30% of the total insulation in the wall. And if you do that, you'll have a condensation-free wall that will be healthier for everybody and that's living there, and it works like beautifully to move that condensation point outside of the wall and to provide, it's almost like putting a winter coat on you. When you put a winter coat on, that's like a thermal break, right? You're wrapping your body in something. So that's the first thing to get to a tighter, healthier homes. But these homes do need ventilation. It's very important. When you build a tight home, you can't just expect that living in an igloo is going to be good for your health, right? So we need to think about that as well. So I kind of drew this graphic just to say, just that yellow boundary around the house really does help keep the heat in and helps keep the cold out, or vice versa in the summertime. Whereas normally, if a house doesn't have those things, air comes in low, it goes through the house and it exits right out. Most homes that we live in are very leaky. That introduces a lot of problems other than just being like high energy bills and wasted energy too. So the passive house standard is, in my opinion, the gold standard for how to build a house. Passive houses are, generally speaking, the least amount of energy that a building can use using normal construction methods. Now, this is a house Meadowlark built for a small family. It was a real decent-sized house, about 3,200 square feet, for 4 people, soon to be 3. You can see all the extra layers that we had to put on. Those large eye joists on the side are called Larson trusses, and we filled those full of foam after building these walls inside that were well sealed and had foam in them. And that's because when you have 4 people living in a house and you need to get it down to that kind of airtightness level and that kind of energy efficiency, that's what you need to do. And this house works beautifully. When Ann Arbor Hills lost power for 5 days several years ago, pretty much that whole neighborhood was going and finding hotels anywhere within a half-hour region to live. Called up our homeowners, how's things going? Oh, pretty good. It's about 61 degrees in here. It's their ventilation system wasn't working, so it smells a little funky in here, but other than that, we're doing good. We're just a few extra blankets and sweaters, and we're happy and healthy in here. Maybe not as healthy as they could be. They said the garbage smells and the foot odors were really getting to them. So, but one thing about dense housing, though, in the Bridges case, is that you have a house that's about twice as large, but carries an occupant load that's 6 to 8 times more people. And when you do that, you get to the point where a modest amount of insulation on the outside and a modest amount of insulation on the inside really, really works. So we're talking about, with 24 people living in this house, 15,000 BTUs per hour right off the top. And for a 40-degree day in Michigan, that's all we need to heat this house. So the house is tight and it's wrapped, and the occupants themselves are providing the body heat that's necessary to heat the house on moderate days. And so we can actually put that to use, and it's uncommon to have a house that's efficient enough where the people's body heat can actually really have a significant contribution to the heating and cooling. One of the other things, that technology that we have is, on the left here, you see a traditional, sort of an American triple pane window, which is basically just an American window with an extra pane in it. Not very efficient, doesn't work very well. On the right, you see the more European models of windows, and what you see is a bunch of gaskets. So as the wind blows on the house, they actually get tighter. Everything is thermally broken in the model so that there's no leakage through from inside to out. Really great technology, and it's starting to become available to us at pretty normal prices. In fact, on the Bridge, I was able to get triple pane European style windows that were made in Manitoba using German components for about the same cost as if I had bought Anderson or Marvin windows, and not even their top of the line windows, just sort of their mid-range windows. So again, starting to happen. Going back to this, that's how you make an efficient structure. You want to thermally break a house. You want to make sure you get very, very low air leakage out of the house, and you want to make sure your windows are good quality windows that are very well sealed. Then the next thing comes to how do you heat not only the home, which is usually 50 to 60% of the energy we'll use in a building, but also the hot water, which is anywhere between 20 and 30%. So heat pumps are what we want to use. Geothermal heat pumps are obviously the most efficient, also can be the most costly, depending on, there are ways that you can make that less costly, and there are ways that you can use some current tax advantages to your advantage doing that. But basically what you're doing is using the steady temperature of the earth, which for us is about 52 degrees. That's right in the middle of heating and cooling season, right? That's something that we can amplify, just like the refrigerator in your home, just like your central air conditioning. It's just that it goes both ways. It provides heating and cooling by reversing the cycle. In the Bridge, I'm also using this split system hot water heater. So, you can get hybrid hot water heat pumps for any home, and they are going to sit in your basement, and it looks like they got a little helmet on them. And in that helmet's a heat pump. But where is that getting the energy from? It's getting it from your house, right? So usually that room will be a little colder because it's collecting heat from there. So that's going to make your heat pump a little less efficient because you're also using that heat pump to heat your water as well. Whereas with a split system like we have here, these have very high performance outputs, and because the energy is coming from outside the home, you get to keep all of that. And what's better is that this being a commercial building, This hot water heater only provides one temperature, 145-degree water. So you do have to put a tempering valve on the top of it, but on a commercial building, you need to make sure that you're above 140 because, just to make sure there's no chance of Legionella in the water. And so this does this automatically, and it does it using carbon dioxide as the refrigerant, which I think is fascinating because carbon dioxide under high pressure has a very high, what we would call lift. So I can bring in water at 52 degrees and get it up to 145. And most heat pumps won't do that. But when you use carbon dioxide as a refrigerant gas, you can do that. In fact, it wants to do that. It's the most efficient way for it to operate. And most refrigerant gases have obscenely high greenhouse warming potentials, in the multiples of thousands per molecule for what carbon dioxide. So all that R410A and what we used to call Freon and things like that they all end up in the atmosphere at some point, and they're very, very potent greenhouse gases. So when we can use carbon dioxide as a refrigerant gas, to me that's a real benefit because if that ever leaks, it's a 1-to-1 ratio, right? So the reason that heat pumps are efficient is that they move heat, they don't create it. So when you burn something, you're creating heat. You're doing a chemical reaction inside a chamber and you're creating heat. Heat pumps just move that heat. They take, even on a day like today, there is heat in the air. And if you can make a gas that boils at a temperature that's lower than what it is outside, you can use that to your advantage, just like your refrigerator. You have a freezer in your home that is using the 72-degree air to freeze food, right? So all it's doing is using gases that change phase so that we can capture that energy. So with fossil fuel appliances, about the best you're going to get is 98% of your efficiency out of that gas. And that's pretty good, right? You're getting almost all of it. But when you use a heat pump, every unit of electricity is worth 3+ times that unit of energy. Now, electricity is more expensive, but if you're getting 3 times as much and you're in an efficient home, and that's really one of the big keys, is if your home is inefficient, you're not going to like your energy bills with a heat pump. So you got to make your home efficient first. But if you do that, this ratio works pretty well. The other thing too is our domestic hot water systems is trying not to waste energy by what goes down the drain and by moving water around the house, hot water around the house especially. So finding efficient distribution systems for hot water is a really important thing. I like to use PEX, cross-linked polyethylene tubing. It makes these soft sweeps that you see here. It's got, it's more slippery inside. It's not nearly as intensive sort of environmentally as mining copper and turning that into plumbing. And also, it just delivers water faster and easier than copper, which has, hard 90s everywhere and stuff. Also, I really have been using these heat recovery drains a lot too. And so if you have 52-degree water coming in and you're taking a shower, and you would basically have the incoming water coming in down here, and it spirals up. And while it does, because water going down a tube will go down the edges of the tube, not down the middle. And so as we're doing that water that's incoming is heating up from the heat of the shower. Let's say though it's going down the drain at, let's say 105 degrees. By the time the cold water gets up to the top of it, you're feeding water that's gone from 52 degrees, let's say, to maybe 85, 86 degrees. So you're using far less hot water as a result. And so that works really well. And it's not, a big deal for sinks and certainly doesn't do anything for toilets, but for showers, it's a big deal. And showers are predominantly where we use a lot of our energy. Sort of the last things too is like, how do you do other appliances that can be all electric? Well, I like to cook. I have had that as a hobby of mine for a long time. And so, I would always look for an apartment that had a natural gas stove, right? Because that was like, I wanted to cook. I didn't want to cook on an electric stove. Well, about 15 years ago, I made this jump over to an induction range, and I got to say, it's even better than a gas stove, and it's 95% efficient. I got to get new pans, which was great. But I really like the controllability of it, and the fact that it's really easy to clean, all those things. And so I don't find a real big drawback to that. conversely, we have also we have, heat pump dryers. What I like about heat pump dryers, and that's different than a condensing dryer, which just basically uses electricity. But a heat pump dryer is about 95% efficient. So it's kind of cool because the cycle goes in, and you've got a hot, wet air that goes into a tube, and then a heat pump turns that into, it wrings all the moisture out of it and turns it into hot, dry air, which goes back into the cycle, and it just repeats like that. They're 95% efficient. You can put them anywhere because it just goes in the laundry drain, same as your laundry machine does. It's just condensing the water out of it. And the only drawback I would say is they take a little longer to dry clothes. It takes about an hour, maybe an hour, 15 minutes, maybe even an hour and a half if you have a kind of a bigger load, and to dry your clothes. So that's a drawback, but it's also much more gentle on your clothes too, so your clothes last longer and things like that. So when you kind of put all that together, when you can now say, okay, well, look, there's a normal house, and there's what a house that's built to be efficient is. So, 35% less, and that's, being generous, by the way. You can get them down to, 85% less energy if you go to the passive house standards. But in general, you're going to be using a whole lot less energy. And then it's possible to use solar panels to go net zero. I mentioned air quality before, and so indoor air quality in American homes is pretty bad. And I'm not exaggerating. This is what the majority of homes in America look like if you were able to see through miles of their air. And the reason is the things that we bring into our home, and all of, especially if you're using natural gas to cook and things like that, all those nitric oxide compounds and things like that carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide are kind of mixing with your air, particularly bad for young people and pets who are at a lower level because they sink to the ground. But also just allergens and things like that. And really we want to make sure that the air in our houses is cleaner, and we use a device called an energy recovery ventilator. And ventilation is the V in HVAC, and if you take out the V, what does it spell? It just spells hack. And so if you don't think about ventilation, then you're really kind of missing the boat on how to make a great house. So we use an energy recovery ventilator, or ERV, to get this. This is a particularly great Swiss model. This is what's going in the bridge, and what I'm really excited about is this unit on the left uses passive geothermal energy. So it brings up I ended up with an extra well that they couldn't get to depth. So I have a well there that was going to be basically useless, except for now I can use it to say, okay, we're going to bring energy up and we're going to run it through this unit, and it's got a heat exchanger in it. So on cold days, I'm able to temper the air coming into the ERV, the active ventilation part of it, so that I'm getting much warmer air that's going into that, so I don't have to worry about heating that air as much. And on summer days, when I'm getting hot, humid air coming in, this passive geothermal system will condense a lot of the water out of the air so that I'm getting ventilation without adding a huge amount of water vapor to the air. So that's important as well. A duct system, or a system like this, really is a rather expensive system, but it's also much better than any of the ERVs that we kind of make in the United States, and meant to really focus on the health of the occupants and things like that. So I really do think that ERVs should be in every home. These typically, it's best if they have kind of a separate duct system, but you can add them onto an existing duct system. We like to pull from bathrooms, kitchens, laundry rooms, areas that tend to have polluted or overly moist air, and we impart the fresh air into bedrooms, living rooms, places where people can benefit from that fresh air. So, important to think about air quality. Also, the way the bridge was laid out, I was able to put in radiant floor heating and cooling, and actually, because of the lack of ducts needed to keep fresh air in there, this ended up being one of the least, and because of the tax credits, which hopefully will still be around, I was able to do this in a pretty cost-effective manner. So we're doing radiant floor heating, which, if you've ever experienced it, is so comfortable. everything in the house is, you're walking on warm floors, and everything in the house is at the temperature that you sit on a couch and it's already warm because the floor has warmed that. It's how we as human beings experience heat as radiantly. It's why a 50-degree day when you're sitting in the sun feels comfortable. And that's the same thing with your floors. If your floors are warm, you feel warm. And now in Europe a lot, they also do radiant floor cooling, and that's what we're doing here too. This is one of the few buildings in the country that will have radiant floor cooling. And the way we do that, because normally if you were to radiantly cool a floor, you would have condensation around those lines, right? But they do make devices that allow you to measure the humidity in all the areas of the home, and the return line going to the in-floor heat keeps the dew point, keeps the water flowing into the floors always at least 2 degrees above the dew point. The only way this won't work is if somebody opens their windows on a really humid day and just lets all the humidity in. It's not going to hurt the house at all. It's just you're going to lose your cooling capacity. That's all. And so you do, in every tight home, you do have to introduce dehumidification. Otherwise, a tight, well-insulated home that's trying to cool in the summer will take about 10 minutes to cool in Michigan, and that's not enough time to draw that moist air out of the air. And we also, as humans, really experience humidity as part of our what makes us comfortable. So, you really have to think about dehumidification in a healthy home too, in a well-made green home. But when you do radiant floor heating and cooling, it's absolutely the most comfortable way to do it, and it's very, very efficient. So the bridge will be 100% solar powered. We are shooting for plus 5%, just as a, and I don't know if that's going to make it or not. It depends on the occupants themselves and their, sort of how they do their thing. But that is the idea. Yeah, and since only 1/3 of the electricity that we use that's made at the power station, only 1/3 of it by the time it gets to our place is actually being used for something useful. Making it on site makes a big difference. And then native landscaping outside. This is near the Huron River Flyway, so how can we make it so that their pollinators and things like that have food to eat and things like that. We're trying to take what was kind of a sterile piece of land and turn it into something that has an opportunity for the things that we want to have food. So a comfortable, healthy, durable, resilient, and regenerative house. That's what we're looking for here. And for the occupant experiences, better health, better comfort, better sleep, and I would hope better social opportunities too. We've kind of designed it to have multiple living spaces and to allow people to sort of have areas where they congregate and can share times together. The last slide really is just like this little thin band there has been our home for a long time, and all the great and small things that have ever happened on this little tiny pixel that goes between the blue and the black there, and so I can't change the world myself, but what I can do is try to act in a way that makes it so that that I am at least doing everything I can to make my part a difference in my life, and that is kind of what drives me. Is that I can't. There are bad things that happen in the world, and there are things that I can't control, but that does not absolve me of the responsibility to try and do my best and make a better place. So that's it. Thanks for attending.
Okay, that's what we're going to do next. We're going to have an opportunity to ask some questions. So if you have a question, I'll bring the mic to you.
Easy. Doug, as a percentage of cost, when you add all these bells and whistles, what does it raise the cost?
It's a hard question to answer right now, but my goal in doing this was to say, okay, how can I use the various credits that are available and all of the things that I did? And I would say that doing all of these things to the house to make it that, given the credits that I have, and that's one of the reasons I went with radiant floor heating, is because that makes me eligible for a much larger credit. I would say about 5%, maybe 10.
If you forget the credits, how much more does it raise the cost? So eliminate the credits.
Eliminate the credits, that would really hurt.
I'm sure it would. I mean, to raise the cost.
Yeah, 15%, let's say.
That's all? Really?
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, it's, you're adding systems to the house, but, a good example is, normally if I was building an apartment building, I'd have ducts going everywhere, right? You have to be, delivering all this really poor quality air everywhere, and lots of it. I don't have to do that here. I've got a smallest duct system you can imagine, because all it's doing is it does deliver heating and cooling through the ERV, but it's delivering just minute quantities of it. So I was able to use my ERV as our primary heating and cooling duct system, and then the radiant floor heating and the radiant floor cooling are really, in some regards, almost auxiliary, but it also just makes a much more comfortable place, and it ensures that I have all the energy I need to do what it needs to do.
Doug, the other big issue always is payback. So,
Well, I mean, payback is 10 to 15 years, you're going to recoup your money on the investment. And then after that, you're basically, in many ways, become your own utility.
okay.
What are some things that people can do that own their own homes that would be the most cost-effective, most highly efficient? If they brought in some of these, what are the first things you could do?
There's nothing more effective than good insulation and good air sealing in your home. I would add that after you do that, put in an energy recovery ventilator if you can, because it makes a difference. I mean, you'll notice a difference. The air quality is much better, and those are not cheap. I know that, but they start out at about $7,500. But your health is worth something, and but insulating your home and air sealing your home are inexpensive and have a very high rate of return. Also, the heat recovery drains are inexpensive way, and they have a very high rate of return. There's a lot of small things you can do, and I also advocate people do this in stages too. It took me about 10 to 12 years for me to sort of stepwise go through my home and get to the point where it was all electric. I'm running my whole home on 100 amps, and it's an all-electric home. So we tend to think that you need all this extra power, but you really don't. You just need to be smart about the power you're using.
Doug, too, a good place to start is with an energy audit.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting somebody to come and do some testing on your home is, there was a study probably 15 years ago that showed that people who did an energy audit before starting to work on their energy efficiency, on average gained about 10% more efficiency, because they had the information to target those problem areas much more effectively. So that makes a big difference. I think starting with an energy audit is a great way to start, and then kind of make an action plan from there. It's hard to find people to do this type of work, but they are out there. Well, I probably wouldn't recommend theirs. I would, and it's simply because they don't go into the depth of detail that you're going to get with a private auditor. They don't do blower door tests. They don't go around and figure out where your air leaks are. They'll come in, take a look around, give you some advice, maybe give you this much pipe insulation, but it's not a real effective strategy. It's just a way for them to say that they're trying.
I did use an induction thing when we were in England, and it was really amazing how well it worked. We have a two-story colonial clapboard house that we need new siding on. What strategies should we use for residing a house that would?
Well, every time I drive by a house that is being reclad without having the thermal wrap put on the outside, I shed one single little tear, because you will never get the opportunity to thermally wrap that house again. And I know that sometimes that's hard. Sometimes people don't have overhangs on their house, so what do you do then? You can get into some sticky areas and things like that, but if you at all have the opportunity to wrap your home with a couple inches of foam, or even a good thermal break, like our thermal barrier, not thermal barrier, but like a blue skin wrap or something like that, that's an airtight wrap, and mineral wool, that works as well. Polyisocyanurate foam, or even the zip sheathing, that makes a huge, huge difference. It's 50% of your total heating and cooling bills. You will notice an enormous difference from that. again, it's not cheap, but it is an investment that's going to last the life of the home. And you just need to make sure, and I know this firsthand, you just need to make sure that you add enough on the outside that you don't get condensation in your walls. Because I've seen homeowners, coming over to their house, somebody put on some new aluminum siding or vinyl siding, and they put like half an inch of foam in there over the old stuff. The house is condensing like crazy on the inside of the walls, and they're getting ants and all kinds of stuff. Most homes in our region are going to need at least 1.5 inches of foam, but I would say be safe and go with 2.
Doug, going back to the energy audit, what does a professional audit actually run nowadays?
Anywhere from $350 to $500.
Still pretty reasonable.
Pretty reasonable price. You get a lot of good information out of it. It really help you target where you should put your money first.
Do you recommend this idea that the city take over their energy system?
I don't know enough about that, Peter. I mean, theoretically, I love the idea. I just don't know the nuts and bolts of how that would actually roll out. I know it works in other cities. I believe Traverse City has their own utility. Lansing has their own utility. So is it possible? Yeah, I think so. I would think that it would probably be more equitable, and there would be some good things about it, but I don't know what it takes to do that. In theory, I'm all for it, but yeah, I just don't know the nitty-gritty.
Question right here, Doug.
Question, what's the name of the Canadian window provider you mentioned?
Oh, Access Window and Door Company in Manitoba.
Thank you.
Yep.
Just a follow-up question. If I didn't use DTE for an audit, who do I use?
Well, there's a guy named Nate Munson who is Evergreen Energy Services. Doug King is a Pro Energy Consultants, which is a franchise, but he's the guy. There are a number of other ones. Ecotelligent Services, they also do the repairs too, which is something that Gary and I used to work on together, is companies that would come in and audit and then do the repairs. Amanda Godward runs that company, and she's great. They do a great job. So they're out there.
A good resource is to go to what's called BRAG. It's the Builders Association of Greater Ann Arbor, BRAG, and they have listing of all the people who are members. And they're local here in Ann Arbor.
Quick question. We see advertised on TV a lot, the blow-in foam insulation services to
Don't ever do that.
okay, that, I thought that might be your answer, but I'm curious. What is it? What's the wrong reason for that?
Well, it's a water-based foam. Great. I like water-based chemicals generally, but they'll blow it in. It's very friable, so it just sort of disintegrates pretty easy, but it shrinks about 1 inch around, so you end up with this thing kind of rattling in your cavity there that provides no benefit at all.
So what solutions that you've shown are applicable to single-family slab homes or ranch homes without a basement? I mean, I have a backyard, but I'm not sure it's big enough for geothermal. I don't know what kind of space.
Oh, you can go vertical with it. I always say if you can park a car there, they can probably get geothermal in. Do you know if your slab is insulated? Probably not. Right. So the best thing you could do is to add a layer of insulation on top and flooring, but that probably means raising doors and things like that too. So that gets a little tricky, but that's your best option. Is because your slab is going to be
Right.
radiating constantly, if not
Right.
that carpet.
So I was already contemplating putting in radiant flooring, which would make the comfort level better, but also would shift my home more towards electric, because it's currently heated by a gas.
Well, radiant floor heating needs a source, so you wouldn't want to use electricity straight up. You'd want to use a heat pump for that to make the hot water do your radiant floors. But if you have a slab on grade and it's uninsulated, you're definitely going to want to put cork or, foam or something down on that floor before you put the radiant floor surface, because it will just, otherwise you're just giving up temperature to the earth all the time.
And also, in light of all the fires in California, how many of these things are non-noxious when lit a fire? So,
Foams are not great when they burn. One of the reasons I do like polyisocyanurate is because it's got a very high flame flash point. So it's, I don't know, I can't remember exactly, but like 1,500 degrees before it catches on fire. So it's somewhat flame retardant itself. Yeah, I would say that, in general, we see Europeans moving to much more natural building products, wood-based insulation and things like that. And when they have fires, they're not nearly as toxic as when American homes have fires, because we're full of vinyl and all these kinds of things. And so, yeah, foams aren't great from that perspective. That's the state of technology that we have at this point. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Oh, okay.
I'll have the most basic question. At the beginning, you talked a lot, and you kept talking about the R value, but you never defined what R value
Oh, I'm
meant.
sorry. Yes, R value is basically resistance to heat flow. So when you're talking about how efficient insulation is, we usually talk about the R value per inch, or the resistance to heat movement per inch. Things like polyiso foam is, 6.5, 7 number, resistance value per inch, whereas a piece of wood is 1.4. Concrete is pretty much 0, right? Heat flows right through it. Metal is pretty much 0. Heat flows right through it. So we want something. The easiest way to tell if something is a good insulator is put your hand on it. If it feels warm, that means it's insulating well, right? So that's why when you grab a metal pipe, it feels cold. Grab a piece of insulation, it feels warm. That's why.
And the interesting thing too, we really have a wonderful stock of mid-century homes, and a lot of those come from California concept, built here in the 50s with no insulation. So what is the recommended R factor for walls and ceilings, Doug?
Well, ideally, I'd like to see walls at, R30 or above, and ceilings at R70 or above, but that's hard to get to, given our construction method. So, especially the old Victorian homes, the older homes that you see, a lot of times they have the rafters coming down. You get a 3.5-inch space at that area between the attic and the upper wall. So what do you do with that? Do the best you can. You want to ventilate that. You don't want to pack it full and, have condensation problems. That's a problem.
Yeah, Doug and I coined a term. We call houses BNOs, which stands for brand new, obsolete. So many of the homes being built today in the subdivisions, brand new, and they're using old technology, minimum insulation. So BNOs, brand new, obsolete homes.
It's a shame to see, and I understand, people need homes, and they're so expensive to build these days. And, it beats not having a home, I suppose, but it really, I wish that the state of the industry would change a little faster, and I wish that, that consumers would recognize that is worth something, because all they would have to do is ask for it. Not all builders are going to do it. A lot of builders would be like, no, but I don't have any experience with it. But it's really not that hard. There's products out there that make it just the same process as you would use normally. It's just a different product. So.
Seeing no other questions? Oh, okay, Darcy.
Is there any legislation that says stop building obsolete houses, like use this instead?
Well, there's the building code. And so we are currently on the 2015 building code. The 2021 building code is considerably better in terms of that regard. But the industry moves so slow to adopt these new codes because they're afraid builders will be overwhelmed by it. And speaking as a builder, you know, a lot of these guys, you know, they go home and do their books at night and stuff like that. I do. You know, so like having to figure out new ways to do stuff, and then having to figure out how to get your subcontractors to do that, and then figuring out, you know, sort of like how I'm going to do that without putting myself at risk. You know, as Meadowlark and as Volta, you know, I was willing to accept those risks by doing the homework up front and spending a lot of nights reading manuals and different things and saying, oh, this actually will work, and we'll give it a try. And then we did it, and it worked really well, and then we did it again, and it worked really well. And so over time, it was like, okay, well, this is a method that works. Let's just do it all the time. And it became no big deal for our guys. They got used to it. And that's really the key, but it's hard to get that in the industry. We're a very slow-moving industry.
Most builders tend to be really risk adverse and not willing to try new stuff because of the research it takes to pull it off.
Yeah.
Well, Doug, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.